Marcus had always been a night owl, so when he was offered a job as a night guard at Greenwood Cemetery, he didn't hesitate to accept. The pay was good, and the hours suited him. Plus, he told himself it was just a cemetery. Sure, it was a bit eerie, but he'd always thought of graveyards as peaceful places where people could finally rest. He never expected that on his first night he'd question everything he believed about life and death. After a brief orientation with his supervisor, he was handed a flashlight and a radio. "Patrol every hour," his supervisor said, "and keep an eye and an ear out for anything strange. You might hear noises, whispers, footsteps, maybe even voices. It's probably nothing, but if it makes you uneasy, just radio in." Marcus chuckled. Voices in a cemetery? Sounds spooky. The supervisor's expression was unreadable. "It's probably just the wind," he said after a pause, though there was something uneasy in his eyes. "Just stay alert." With that, Marcus was left alone, the vast cemetery stretching out under a starless sky. Tombstones cast long shadows under the dim moonlight, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind drifted through the trees. The first couple of hours were uneventful. Marcus walked along the rows of graves, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He noted a few stray animals, mostly raccoons, and the occasional owl perched atop a headstone. Around 2 a.m. he decided to take a break near the maintenance shed, sipping his coffee as he looked out at the rows of tombstones. That's when he heard it. A soft, muffled whisper floated through the still night air. At first he thought he was imagining it, but as he strained to listen, he realized it wasn't just one voice, there were several, blending together in an eerie, overlapping chorus. Marcus's heart pounded as he followed the sounds. The whispers grew louder as he moved deeper into the cemetery, and soon he saw them, shadowy figures drifting among the graves. His flashlight caught glimpses of faces pale, hollow-eyed, yet strangely familiar. He blinked, struggling to process what he was seeing. These figures looked like people he'd seen in town recently, neighbors, store clerks, people he knew had died over the past few weeks. One figure, in particular, caught his eye. Mrs. Hargrove, the sweet elderly woman who ran the corner store, was slowly moving among the graves, her face ashen and her eyes vacant. She'd passed away 2 weeks ago. He was sure of it. He'd even attended her funeral. Marcus's breath hitched, and he took a shaky step back. He wanted to call for help, to radio his supervisor, but his hands were trembling so badly that he dropped the radio. The clatter seemed to echo in the silence, and the figures stopped. Slowly, they turned to look at him, their hollow eyes fixing on him with a cold, empty stare. Panicked, Marcus stumbled backward, his heart hammering as he fumbled for his flashlight. He aimed it toward them, but the beam seemed to pass right through their translucent forms, as though they were barely there at all. Then, one of them, a young man he recognized from town who'd died in a car accident, began to move toward him. Marcus backed up, his voice catching in his throat. "Stay back," he whispered, unsure if they could even hear him. But the young man kept moving forward, his face twisted in sorrow. When he was close enough for Marcus to see the tear tracks running down his pale cheeks, he spoke in a low, hollow voice. "Help us, we're not at rest." Marcus's pulse raced, his mind reeling. What do you mean?" he managed to stammer. More figures began to approach, their voices blending together into an overwhelming cacophony of whispers, each one pleading, desperate. "Help us. We're trapped. Find her. Release us." Marcus's vision blurred as he stumbled backward, barely managing to keep himself upright. Who do I need to find?" he gasped, his words nearly drowned out by the chorus of voices. As if answering his question, a single name echoed through the crowd, repeated in 100 whispering voices. Evelyn. He had no idea who Evelyn was, but it was clear that the spirits did. Before he could ask more, the figures began to fade, their forms dissolving into mist as the whispers died away. Soon the cemetery was quiet again, and Marcus was left standing alone among the tombstones, his mind racing. The next day, exhausted and shaken, Marcus returned to work early, determined to find out more. He went through the cemetery's records, scanning recent obituaries, and there it was, Evelyn Reed. She had passed away just a month ago, but her burial location was unusual. She was laid to rest in an unmarked grave, isolated from the other plots. With a newfound sense of purpose, Marcus made his way to the far corner of the cemetery, where he found the unmarked plot. Grass had grown over it, as if nature itself was trying to forget. He knelt beside the grave, unsure what to do. "Evelyn," he whispered, "are you here? Can you hear me?" For a moment there was nothing. Then a cold breeze stirred, and he felt a presence beside him. He turned, and there she was, a ghostly figure, younger than the others, her face sad but resolute. "Why are they trapped?" Marcus asked softly. "What happened?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "I wronged them, bound their spirits with my own as revenge against the world that wronged me. They can't rest until I do." Marcus swallowed, a chill running through him as he pieced it together. Evelyn had somehow cursed these souls, tethering them to the cemetery out of spite, leaving them to wander in endless torment. He didn't know how he could help, but he felt a surge of determination. "Tell me what I have to do," he whispered. Evelyn looked at him with haunted eyes, and her pale hand drifted to a necklace around her neck. The locket dangled from it, and as she reached out, he felt a strange energy emanating from it. "Bury this in my grave," she said. "Once it's done, they'll be free." Summoning his courage, Marcus took the locket, its cold metal stinging his hand, and dug a small hole beside Evelyn's grave. He placed the locket in the ground and covered it, pressing the soil down firmly. As he stood, the air grew warmer, and a sense of peace seemed to settle over the cemetery. The distant whispers faded, and for the first time since he'd taken the job, the graveyard felt quiet, truly quiet. Marcus looked around, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw the figures of Mrs. Hargrove, the young man, and the others, their faces soft and calm, watching him with gratitude before dissolving into the morning mist. When his supervisor arrived, he found Marcus sitting by the grave, his face pale but peaceful. "Everything all right?" his supervisor asked, glancing around uneasily. Marcus nodded, giving the cemetery one last look. "Yeah," he replied softly, "I think they've finally found peace." As he walked away from Greenwood Cemetery, Marcus felt lighter, though he knew he'd never forget the voices, the shadows, and the sense of relief that had washed over him as the spirits finally found rest.